You're listening to the Book Talk Today podcast, a podcast that inspires readers to obtain valuable insights to inform, educate, and improve lives. My name is Abdi. I'm an avid reader, best known for the creation of the 1 Minute Book Review community, and I'm sitting down with authors to delve deeper into the books they have written to uncover the story behind the story. Hello Book Talk Today family, and welcome back to another episode of the Book Talk Today podcast. My name is Orn, I am your host, and today we're celebrating episode 50 of the podcast. I can't quite believe it. It's pretty amazing that we've had 50 authors on so far. And for episode 50, we are joined by Oliver Burkeman to talk about his book, 4,000 Weeks, Time and How to Use It. Productivity is somewhat of a cult following on the internet. There's productivity gurus and productivity hacks everywhere you look. Articles, videos, they're everywhere. Podcasts, they're everywhere. And in this book, Oliver talks about a new approach to productivity, about not trying to control your time in the way that productivity gurus tell you to, but it's more of a new and refreshing look at productivity. In our podcast, we discussed some of the elements in this book, but also the effects that technology has had on productivity and how we can create and manipulate time in the best way possible in order to be more productive. So if you're anyone who loves productivity or is interested about how to use your time better, you'll very much enjoy this podcast. If you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please do. Every week we release a podcast with an author to discuss their books. And we've had some really, really good guests on the podcast so far. So you can check out the 49 episodes before this one, but after you've watched this one. I hope you enjoy it. Oliver, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks very much for the invitation.
You're welcome. And productivity is something that has fascinated me as an avid reader of non-fiction books and productivity books in general. It seemed to become some sort of cult following on the productivity side. There's people out there trying to optimize every portion of their life. And I think it's an interesting topic to discuss given the situation that we're currently in. So I think to start with, it would be great to describe what the concept of 4,000 weeks is and how you came to it.
Well, that number is just, the number of weeks that average human lifespan on the planet approximately is. If you live to be 80, you'll have had a few more than 1,000 weeks, and I'm rounding it for, in order to have a nice number. But I think what I'm trying to get at in the book is less really to do with the specific amount of time and much more to do with the sheer fact of the finitude, right? The fact that our time is limited in this kind of quite startling way, and what that implies for things like productivity and things like using time well. Because I do think that an awful lot of the advice that we receive, especially sort of in the self-help genre and stuff like that, for how to use time, is kind of premised, usually not explicitly, usually implicitly, on the idea that we could somehow make time to do everything, or at least everything that really matters. And that with the right techniques and enough efficiency and enough self-discipline, you could get there. And I think the consequence of really understanding finitude is to see that actually that's off the table to begin with. That, doing anything like everything that seems like it has a good claim to be done is ridiculous. And so you have to come up with some alternative way of thinking about making time for what matters. I do think that this approach that I'm talking about here is actually much more leads to much more peace of mind in the long run as well, because you're no longer trying to do this thing that is actually impossible, which is no way to spend your life. But I guess that's the outline of it as it applies to productivity, certainly.
What, in your personal experiences, what has been your experience with productivity? How have you come to, in the book you call yourself a productivity geek. So were you always that way, or was there just circumstance happened that you just were interested in this field?
I mean, I guess I wasn't literally always this way, but yeah, I think as a young adult, from there onwards, I was very sort of fixated on trying all these different techniques and methods and trying to find a way to, well, really what I didn't realize then was to try to find a way to feel completely in control of my time. I think that was completely secure in terms of my own ability to do anything that could be thrown at me or that I might want to do. That sort of feeling of being in the driver's seat, I guess, is the thing that I think a lot of people, certainly me, are seeking in a lot of these techniques. It's like the system that would enable you to like breathe a sigh of relief and just sort of know that you were doing everything you ought to be doing going forward into the future. This book is really about what I discovered and understood about time once all that had failed. Once I was on the sort of 100th such productivity technique, and one finally dawning on me that maybe it wasn't the most effective path to this feeling of being in control.
I think that feeling of control is an interesting one, because it's definitely an underlying thread throughout your book, because control is perhaps something that is unattainable. Would you say that?
Yeah, I mean, in the definition, in the meaning of the word that I'm giving to it, I think it is unattainable. I think you can use the word to mean a certain kind of self-control in the context of uncertainty and in the context of insecurity that is attainable, some sort of stoic thing. But it's this sense of being able to know in advance that you can be able to do everything that could come your way, and that you can feel confident about what the future holds. That kind of control, I think, is impossible for humans with respect to time. Yeah,
I think the control aspect is interesting, because a lot of the time we think that we're in control of everything we do, but we easily forget the areas in our life that are out of our control. And majority of the things that happen to us aren't actually in our control. They're from how people talk to us. They're what other people do that affect our lives. Mm-hmm. So it's very easy to think that we're in control of everything. And productivity, I feel like, is an answer to that fear or that apprehension, whatever that might be.
Yes, right. I mean, I think it's I would say that it's easy for us to feel like we're very nearly in control of everything. So you always feel like you're on the cusp of this level of control, right? Because we have all this technology now that makes it seem like you ought to be able to use it to manage hypothetically infinite volumes of information and infinite numbers of tasks. Everything, sort of technology that makes things go so fast, that is so that again, and frictionlessly, that you think like, well, if I can do it this fast, maybe I can do it at sort of absolute speed, and therefore never have to take any tough decisions or say no to anything. So yeah, I think it does get tougher the closer you get to what feels like this state of superhuman omnipotence. But of course, you never get there, so it's all the more frustrating to not quite be there.
Upon the technology aspect there, I think the technology perhaps has been used as an excuse for the productivity in that respect, because technology is used to facilitate greater uses of productivity. But in the past, they had the same aversion to this feeling of finitude. I think in the book as well, you reference the fact that even in sort of the Greek times and the philosophers, they still were debating this fact about distractions and the best use of their time. So do you feel like technology is just kind of just used as a scapegoat for distraction and productivity rather than just helping us in that way?
Yeah, I think I'm always in the book trying to sort of balance these two ideas, that we're partly talking about something that is a universal problem of being human, and then we're partly talking about something that is very modern and technology driven. I think basically technology brings something to a head that has always been there. I think that might be one way of putting it. It's not that people in the past didn't rail against the limitations of their finite time, but it is that technology, firstly technological developments and other developments as well, but make it much more possible for more and more stuff to come our way that we might want or feel obliged to do with our time, and also provide this kind of ultimately deceptive feeling that we have new ways to do more and more and more of it. So it's sort of as a catalyst, it's something that makes it much more acute, I think, which is a good thing in a sense, because maybe that's what enables us to finally come to terms with this situation and take a different approach, right? The fact that it seems like it's reached an impossible stage, it can't be as easily ignored as maybe it could be at certain times in the past.
I think for individuals, perhaps my age, when they get into the productivity, they've already had this technology. Whereas perhaps when you got into it, and obviously I'm not calling you old at all, but you've probably seen a development in the use of technology and productivity. How has that changed your approach to productivity or seeing it?
Well, it's an interesting question, because I would say, like, even if you're a digital native, you probably have seen a lot of changes. I started working in newspapers, or in other words, started my career at all. The internet was present, but it was like a box in the corner that you sort of had to go and use for 10 minutes to try and find information. It wasn't. It was very few years after that it started to become just absolutely everything that we were doing in newspapers. Certainly, yeah. It's hard to know if my sort of childhood was less beset by these things for technological reasons, or because I was a child, I do remember email at college, at university, and not being remotely burdened by it, because you would sort of check it every few days and have 2 emails from like your dad or something. So it didn't fulfill the role that it fulfills now. And I do remember writing longhand letters to people at university in the late 90s. So, yeah, I guess it is changed. It's interesting. It's hard to untangle these 3 different things: technology changing all this, universal truths of being human, and then like no longer being a child, because life always seems simple. It seems that it was simpler in the past. So.
Can you just touch upon what you just said about the universal human truth regarding productivity and time? I think it might be good to unpack what you believe to be the main universal truths or ideas surrounding humans and time and how we use it.
Well, I guess I'm really just referring to that fact that, we have this capacity in our minds and in our cultures that we create to have sort of infinite ambitions, or to feel infinite pressures from other people. It's good and bad stuff, right? Like, you could be someone who wants to create creative works, and you can easily imagine more of them than you're capable of having the time to do. Or you could be somebody who feels very intensely sort of family duties or social duties or religious duties or something, and then you can always there's always another one you can feel. So regardless of whether it's got a sort of positive or a negative value, it's just limitless. And then here we are, material beings with a certain amount of stamina, a certain number of hours in the day, and a certain number of years in life. So it's just a mismatch. It's just sort of built in to this weird situation that we are as conscious material beings, I guess, that your reach is always going to, or can always exceed your grasp. So I guess that's all that's just the starting point. I mean, the starting point is just that, and I think as a result, and this is a very old thing that goes way back before the technological stuff we've been talking about, there's a very natural tendency to want to avoid confronting that fact, to pursue ways of feeling limitless and feeling unbound by reality, rather than sort of turning to face the fact that we in fact are bound. I think that point you just said is the counterintuitive nature of it, because you have movies like Limitless, or you have all this technology that you can use in order to do more or feel as if you're doing more, whatever it might be, whether they be to-do lists or whatever it might be. But it all distracts you from the fact that you are finite, you do have finite time, and the things that you do increase in value because you've only got finite time. Whereas I think sometimes the technology itself distracts you from that actual point. So it's that counterintuitive nature of it. I think you did a great job in the book explaining that. Oh, thank you. Yes, I mean, I think it's right. It's I think you're touching also there on this idea that it wouldn't be good to have eternal life. This would be or there's certainly an argument there anyway, that it would be that there would be no stakes to how you use your time. The answer to the question, should I do this with the next hour, would always be doesn't matter, and that would be a depressing place to be in. Yeah, and that's why I think the philosophy and time management goes kind of hand in hand, which is a bit weird when you think about it from a sort of a contemporary point of view, because productivity hackers or productivity managers would just think about the technological aspect, but I actually think it derives in philosophy and what is the approach to life, or how to live a meaningful life. Is that the approach that you take and the view that you hold as well? Well, I just think ultimately, if you take time management seriously, it just expands to be the question of how to of how to live. It depends on what you mean by manage time or use time, but basically we are here with a time management challenge, which is to build the most meaningful lives we can in the time that we have. One of the things that productivity culture sort of gets wrong is definitely that it sort of is very narrow in its focus of domain, but also that it plays into this idea that like using time for future benefits, getting in control so that you can maximize in an instrumental fashion how you're using your time. The idea that that's the only way to think about it here is one of the things that I'm sort of concerned to undermine a bit in the book, I suppose, and think about, well, maybe using time well sometimes means not being really focused on how well you're using it in an ironic sense. Maybe it's not always about where this is leading in the future, because the future ultimately is always in the future. So you're going to have to get some value from the present moment at some point in your life if you're ever going to get any value from it at all.
Yeah, I think you touch upon that in the book as well. You talk about plans and making plans, because a plan is always in the future and you're substituting living in the present for the making of a plan. But a plan is only a representation of the future. It's not a prediction. Sorry, it is a prediction. It's not a manifest of it, if that makes sense. So are you saying that planning is good and everyone should plan? Or are you saying that plans are limited and we should approach plans as limited?
I think the latter. I mean, I'm not saying don't plan, and I would be a hypocrite if I did say that, because I do. But I think the challenge, again, a challenge I struggle with rather than one that I've perfectly come to terms with, is to plan in a spirit that recognizes reality. And one big part of that, as you say, is to see that a plan is a present moment statement of your intentions. It's a bit like sort of I never know if this is the right. I don't have a good knowledge of like maritime navigation, but it's something to do with like it's to do with like planning the next part of your course based on what you know now, in the full understanding that you're going to have to change course later. I feel like this is something people do on ships, but I don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so the point is that you can be very serious about the plan, but that's not the same as saying you've got a sort of expectation that reality will match up to it and that something has gone terribly wrong if reality doesn't match up to it. And I think that's a very powerful place to be with regard to planning. And I think it is better ultimately, especially in a work context, than just spontaneously skipping through life with no plans at all. But because you get the best of both worlds, really, right? You get the directedness without this kind of weird, anxious worry about whether reality is going to end up exactly going the way you think you need it to go, which it won't, though.
Yeah, it inevitably won't. It almost certainly won't.
Right.
And I think it's the balance between the two, because I think so I do like a Q&A every Sunday on my Instagram channel, and on that a lot of young students specifically ask me the question is like, how do I become less distracted, or how do I plan my time better? And one of the things I say is sort of time blocking from the productivity aspect. But then I think many people go down the route of like planning every minute, right? Which is counterintuitive to the whole point, because like you said, you have to plan, but you have to plan for flexibility rather than plan for the utilization of every minute, because then you're just spending all your time planning rather than actually doing, which I feel is part of the issue. Yeah, no,
time boxing is a great example. And I think, you bring up this very, very good point there, which is if you do it at a very fine resolution, I guess in principle, there's nothing wrong with that. But firstly, the overheads of actually planning it, as you say, are taxing. Secondly, you're just really maximizing the number of ways in which reality is going to collide with such a plan. So you're sort of making it so brittle that you're just, if you struggle in any way with this thing that I certainly struggle with, which is, holding your plans loosely, you're just making it harder for yourself. If you say by contrast, that you're going to put in a 3-hour work block on focused work and later in the day a 2-hour block on admin and email or something, even that probably won't come off exactly as you planned, but it's a much more sort of resilient kind of basic idea to have in the back of your mind, because okay, maybe you end up needing to start that a half hour late, or finish it a half hour early, or take a break in the middle for some crisis that's unfolding. That's very simple. If it's all in 5-minute increments, it's a complete nightmare. Yeah.
It is, because you're going to set yourself up for disappointment. I've been there many times, by the way, because I used to do that. And the main flaw is obviously the time admin that it takes, and the upfront work that you have to do pretty much on a weekly basis just to spend time to do it. But it's also the inevitable fact that if one thing gets delayed, it delays everything. So then you're left actually half completing everything that you want to do, which makes you feel worse than if you just didn't do it at all. So
no, absolutely, yeah, totally.
That's why I like. There was this book that I read called Make Time by Jake Knapp and John Zaretsky.
Yeah.
I don't know if you. Yeah, in that they talk about highlight, don't they? They say, okay, just have one thing that you want to do each day, and that's going to be a productive day if you just do that one thing. Do you think that approach is better, just to sort of just focus your attention on just the one main thing and then build your schedule around that?
I think that's definitely a useful tactic. What it makes me think of, I mean, you can go different ways with why that counts, and one of them is to do with focus. The thing that I really like, and I've written a bit about, is really this idea of how you're defining a productive or an accomplished day, and making sure that you sort of honestly kind of set the bar really low in a way, because we have such a tendency to set the bar just like several chunks further than we have any chance of achieving in a day. So one of the reasons to only aim for one thing in a day is to actually make it quite a relatively small thing. I don't mean necessarily like answer one email or something, but if you're working on a big creative project, it could be to write 500 words or to work on it for an hour, something that ought to be very easily manageable in the day. And then to see everything else that you managed to do in the day as sort of surplus, as gravy. I wrote a while ago in a newsletter about this kind of, it's clearly not just me, the way that people responded to it, that like we seem to get up in the morning thinking we're in some kind of productivity debt that we have to pay off by the end of the day. And if you're really lucky and it's a really good day, you might get back to zero balance in your like moral account and with the universe. Now, obviously, if you're paid a salary in a company, you sort of are in a kind of productivity debt in a sense, right? You have to do things for the money, but this existential sense people have that like if I haven't done enough things by the end of the day, I haven't proved my like sort of right to exist or something. I don't think it is just me exposing my own terrible hang-ups here, and so then it's a really great idea to be able to think about ways to organize the day that kind of flip that and say, okay, how about I start the day thinking how about I could start the day at zero balance anyway, and anything that I do is sort of an additional credit to my account instead of trying to scramble up out of debt. So yeah, one very simple way to do that, of course, that you'll know about is just to keep a done list as well as a to-do list, and to make a proper sort of ritual of recording all the things that you have finished and have completed, so that it sort of builds up satisfyingly. Because we have a terrible tendency to like beat ourselves up for the 50 things we have to do, and then the moment something's done, it's just gone. Like no focus on it at all. It's just the remaining 49 that count. I mean, some kind of to-do list is effective. I need, certainly just in that sort of David Allen keeping track of things, getting things done sense, I really do need something to not be relying on my own head to keep track of the things that I've said I'll do or have decided it would be a good idea to do. If you mean a to-do list as in an ordered list and you just work through it and that's how you get things done, I think there's a lot more anyone interested in productivity can talk about this topic for about 8 hours, of course. But, I think there's a lot.
I find it interesting because I think a lot of people think of a to-do list, like you said, as just a list of things that they have to do rather than the things that they actually want to do. And I think a lot of people's approach to doing things is doing things that they feel like they're obliged to do, in the sense of, like you said, the productivity debt is they feel like they have to do it rather than there is things that you have to do, go to work, study, these types of things. And I'm not really talking about those types of things. I'm talking about the things that we feel like obliged to do. And if we don't do them, we incessantly beat ourselves up about it, which I think is a terrible thing for, I think, general health, I think.
Yes.
And I think setting up your time with the aspect of, or the mindset of doing things that are of benefit, and things that you want to do is a really important thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a difficult thing because we as you say, you don't want to sound like someone just telling someone who needs to work to keep a roof over their head, or who has to remember to feed their children. You can't. There are all sorts of things that you have to do, but I mean, a sort of useful philosophical way of putting it, which I guess is a bit kind of existentialist and calls to mind Jean-Paul Sartre or something, is I suppose there isn't anything at all that you have to do in the most ultimate sense of the phrase have to do. In other words, you're always doing anything that you do for some reason. Now, there will be reasons in your life, like, being a sort of minimally okay parent to your kids, or not being homeless. There'll be things that feel totally non-negotiable. They're not really choices in the day-to-day sense of the term, because there's no context in which you wouldn't prioritize doing them. But it's useful to see anyway, just as almost as a theoretical point, I think, that you don't have to do them in the sense that, like, the universe does not require it of you, because that's actually a very useful mental filter, I guess, to find those things that are right on the boundary. So the things that are not really the absolute truest survival, being a decent person needs, but are these things that you've told yourself or just assumed for years that you have to do. And things like, following a certain kind of career path because it was sort of pressed into you from a very young age that those were the respectable forms of career path, or thinking that if you don't at least complete a lot of activity in the course of a working day, you've somehow done something automatically wrong. So I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but it's very useful to be able to see, why am I doing this thing? And the why may be, in some cases, maybe absolutely overpowering. But in a lot of cases, it might be less overpowering than you had assumed. Does that make sense?
Overpowering, do you mean by deriving meaning from it?
Or just the degree to which something is something that you must do and that you're sort of obliged to do. I feel like I'm someone who's gone through a lot of my earlier adulthood with a sense of many, many obligations that I have. And some of them I really do have if I want to achieve certain extremely basic goals, like, not being a neglectful parent, or not being the world's worst spouse, or not getting evicted from my apartment. No, that's really important, because you do need to do those things, really. And to say that you have a choice is a bit of an odd use of the word choice. But then there's a whole lot of other things that sort of have that kind of obligatory feel. And if you really stop to ask, well, what's the why here? They're much less obligatory, and you probably could, get away with jettisoning them if a different route in life seemed more meaningful to you. That's all.
Yeah, I think it's reframing it in that respect, everything that you do through an aspect of why, because I think what a lot of people struggle with is they do things because they feel obliged to for whatever reason, like you said, family reasons, cultural reasons, societal reasons. A lot of people feel like they have to buy and do things because it's the accepted thing to do. Mm-hmm. And I think it's just, like you said, approaching that. And I think in the book, actually, I think it was the latter part, you talk about Cosmic Insignificance Theory, which is sort of that look about, okay, if I was to do this and I did it really well, or even if I didn't do it at all, does it really matter at the end of the day? Because I will be turned to dust, if that makes sense. So,
yeah, I mean, I think it can. Yeah, I think it's really useful to understand just how small the stakes are for anything that one human ever does in their lives. Not because that means that life is meaningless, but because it sort of enables you to tailor your standards of what counts as meaningful to your real situation. It's like there's no need to beat yourself up about not changing the course of the world, or to think that the things that you're doing in your life aren't meaningful just because they only reach a small number of people, or in 200 years nobody may have any memory of them. That's a very unfair standard of meaning to put on yourself.
Do you feel it's fairly pernicious then when people are talking about, I know in the book as well, you talk about the overused phrase by Steve Jobs about putting a dent in the universe. Do you feel like that's a fairly pernicious thing to say then, because it overestimates perhaps what normal people can do?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a couple of things. I don't think it's pernicious. If it genuinely motivates somebody, then I don't think it's on me to take away their source of motivation. I think the pernicious thing is, well, yeah, if you take it literally, Steve Jobs didn't make a dent in the universe, right? The iPhone is not significant on a cosmic scale of billions of years. Obviously, it is hugely significant on a slightly more normal scale of, decades and maybe centuries. So that's useful to remember, just if you sort of risk running away with those ideas. But also, I think it's not to do with like give up trying to do that really cool thing. I think anyone who's sort of on that path should, and is excited by it, should totally be on that path. But it's about saying, let's not assume that things that aren't like that are meaningless, right? I mean, let's not assume that much more ordinary looking things that people do, if your life involves, caring for somebody who's sick or cooking meals and raising kids, if it involves, being a yoga teacher and in the course of your life, a few hundred or 1,000 people might have had a bit more sort of sense of freedom, physical freedom or relaxation or happiness as a result of your work. Like, don't start saying that's a bad way to spend your life just because you didn't transform the daily habits of almost every, person on the face of the planet or something. Tell me if I'm rambling, but there's a really interesting bit from, I forget his name, but there's an environmental activist who's very, very sort of at the forefront of a lot of sort of high-profile environmental activism, who took a year off or a couple of years off or something to care for his mother-in-law, who was very old and needed sort of a lot of round-the-clock care, and making this point that, like, from a certain kind of calculation that you might think a certain kind of environmental activist might make, like, that's really pointless because, like, the planet's going to be destroyed. Like, what are you doing wasting 2 years of your ability to influence people in the halls of power, looking after this elderly lady? But as he points out, not that what he did was better necessarily, but just that, like, you don't want to have a value system in life that makes, that kind of rather mundane, probably very tedious individual act of caring for somebody. Like, you don't want to have a system of meaning that says that's a waste of time. Something in us is surely understands that isn't a waste of time. And it's not just that particular example. It's just like, the world stage is not the only stage on which, it's important to do things, I suppose is all I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think the use of the example you gave in the book about lawyers was an interesting one, because then it's always a value proposition of your time. Mm-hmm. And then there's a lot of individuals, especially capitalists, that talk about or just see hours as just time, as in money that could be made doing X and X. And I've heard many people talk about that should be our approach to time, is we should see it, if it's not worth doing from a monetary point of view, mm-hmm. then we shouldn't do it. And to me, that doesn't really make sense, because if I'm going to spend time with my grandfather, I'm not going to be thinking, oh, that's £30 of wasted time. To me, that it's not a very healthy way to see time or the use of your time.
No, I think that's absolutely right. There's two things there. There's doing it all for some future purpose instead of for the present, and then there is the future purpose of having lots of money, which after a certain threshold is not even a very good future purpose. Yeah.
True. Where do you think delayed gratification comes into it? Because we've been talking about sort of using your present moment for the betterment of the future, and I think that's an inherent part of what it means to be human, because we can't always live in the present and be like you said, sort of floating around and just doing as we wish. So where do you think the balance is between having an element of delayed gratification and doing things in the present for the betterment of our future, but also having that being present mindset as well?
That's a very interesting question. I mean, what I want to say is that they don't need to be. It doesn't need to be a dichotomy, right? I mean, at least in principle, you can find meaning in present moment activities that are also there for the purposes of some long-term outcome that you're working towards. I don't think you necessarily always find happiness, and that's maybe where the delayed gratification piece comes in. When I think about, I mean, it's hard for me to think about large projects recently, other than writing this book, because it was a very large project. I mean, on some days I had a terrible time and was obnoxious to live with and all sorts of things. But on the good days, even then, it wasn't like I was sitting there loving it. I was delaying gratification in the sense that the sort of happiness of having it finished and hearing from people who it's resonated with was all in the future. But there was totally a present moment sense of meaning. Again, on the good days, I don't want to make too many grand claims, but there was totally a present moment sense of meaningfulness. It wasn't just like the only kind of gratification I'm getting out of this is it wasn't like, oh, it's terrible and it better be worth it when I've finished it. It was like, no, this is a meaningful way to be spending a few hours of my day here on the planet. And in that kind of, sometimes it's uncomfortable or challenging, but there in this, it's like there's lots of things like that are uncomfortable in that way, but it has a certain quality that is something that it's good to be doing with your life at that moment. So I don't think these things need to be a dichotomy. I guess obviously there are things that are very dichotomous, sort of pure present moment hedonism, and certain tasks that we sort of absolutely hate but have to do for future benefit. I don't know, I'm thinking about like doing my tax returns, something like that. Studying, well, that's an interesting case. I guess it depends on what you're studying. It's a long time since I was doing a lot of academic studying, and I did not take the wise attitude I'm now preaching to other people when I was doing it. So.
Would you not consider writing a book to be an academic study?
I mean, I guess it's similar in lots of ways. I'm just thinking specifically about sort of prescribed reading on university courses. The wonderful thing about writing this book was that, like, broadly speaking, I could just follow my interests. In fact, one of the pitfalls you run into, I think, writing a book like this is that you suddenly find yourself, you go off on these detours where you think it's got to be comprehensive, it's got to be a textbook of something. And then I'm always brought back by wise editors and agents and people who point out that what it needs to be is kind of like a whole bunch of interesting chapters that people want to read. It does not need to be a comprehensive treatment of any topic.
Exactly. And I think the interesting thing about that is you touched upon the happiness aspect. And I think the happiness dilemma, if you want to call it, is all brought upon this idea that, like we've been saying, that we're in control, but it's also that happiness can be achieved and felt at all and every moment. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where distraction comes in, because I think in the book as well, you talk about the idea that we're even distracted by the things that we know are meaningful to us. Yeah. I think there was a quote that you put in the book by someone about that. And I thought that was one that resonated with me, because I feel an urge, even when I'm doing something meaningful, to go to my phone for whatever reason. And it's not even we're distracted by the things that we know that we don't want to do. It's even the things that we are absolutely set that we want to do, and we're still distracted by it, which I found is a fascinating flaw in us humans.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that the stuff you care about doing triggers these uncomfortable thoughts. So I think that we can sort of follow that through in a fairly understandable way. Projects that you're not sure you'll succeed in, conversations that you know you need to have but that will probably feel awkward. These are the things that matter, and then they feel uncomfortable because they do matter, and then you want to distract yourself because you don't want to feel uncomfortable. So it all fits together in that respect.
Definitely fits together, and it's one of those things for me. It's about this aspect that you talk about in the book. It's about living on borrowed time. So where is the relationship between the borrowed time aspect and sort of finitude? Because I think the finitude aspect is the big part of the book, where you talk about we have a set amount of time and we're living to that excuse me, and we can't change or manipulate that. But the time that we do have isn't given to us. It's more we're just present and we're living it, and we're not given it as some sort of we're not entitled to it. I guess that's my point.
Yeah, no, I mean, in a way, that point is just sort of ramping up the finitude, right? Finitude, it's easy to talk about limited time in the sense of, well, we only have a very small amount of time. And then this is just the reminder that, like, we don't even really have that small amount of time. You don't have it in the way that you have money or have possessions. You can't put any of it aside for later. There's a sort of, at least in one sense, there's a sort of total, we live in a total state of sort of communism when it comes to time, because everybody has exactly the same amount. There's another sense in which we don't, but anyway, so it's very odd compared to all other kinds of things that we say we have. And to quote a writer I quote in the book, David Kane, when we say that we have 3 hours to finish something, or we have a week before we need to do something, what we mean is we expect that time, and we have maybe good or bad reason for expecting that time to be free. But you can never be sure that it's going to be free. You can never be sure that things are going to go the way you hope. But again, I sort of try to take that to this final place there in the book, which is to say, well, okay, it's true that we don't have time, but it's also true that that's only a problem if you start from thinking of yourself as kind of entitled to time. And there's no obvious reason why we should think of a human lifespan as very short compared to infinity, instead of very long compared to never having been born in the first place. And so there is a kind of, I'm not saying I'm in this mindset every hour of every day, but there is a kind of radical gratitude that you can find in this for just the weird, crazy chance of being alive to experience anything, which makes it a lot easier when you're in that mindset anyway to sort of deal with the fact that you might be standing in a queue for a bus, or like on hold on some phone line, or doing some work that you find boring. It's like, okay, maybe that particular activity right now isn't the greatest, but it's just so strange and brilliant that you even got to experience it. That's kind of amazing. That sort of, you don't have time, but it's also like every moment that you get is, in a very non-cheesy sense of the word, is a gift, right? It's like it's genuinely right, but it's like genuinely there is no entitlement to it, and yet you get it. So what else is the definition of a gift? Yeah,
exactly. And I think you referenced Viktor Frankl's book in Man's Search for Meaning, and he said in that it's very similar sentiment. It's like every anything that happens to you that is good or bad, mostly bad, in this respect, is a representation of how you view it, and it's up to you to make the best use of it, rather than just wishing for something to be different. Because I think the way that we see it sometimes is we're constantly wishing for things to be different, and in the wish we don't appreciate the present. I think that is perhaps where you're trying to get to in the book. You're trying to say, okay, we're constantly planning, we're constantly looking for the future, but what does it mean to actually live? Does it just mean to be living in the future, or does it mean to be present?
Right. No, and I think it's, yes, there is something that is taken away from life when the value that you're placing on it is all not in the present moment, and that valuing the present moment starts by sort of acknowledging the reality of your situation. None of which, always worth adding this caveat, this kind of acceptance that we and lots of self-help books also talk about, and that they talk about. It's not about saying that the situation that you're in is one you have to put up with. It's not about saying that changing your situation isn't allowable or maybe even important. It's about acknowledging that you really are where you really are as a first step to doing anything, instead of these ways of looking for the future or the past or whatever, or trying to get in control of time, which are all basically ways of avoiding the truth about where you are right now. I don't think it follows that once you have confronted that truth a bit, you necessarily have to be okay with it.
Do you think a lot of people approach it that way? Do you think they just feel like they are burdened by their present situation and then it's not going to end, and they just sort of accept it?
I think that people confuse acceptance with resignation, right? And I think that they don't understand in the first place what it means to accept reality, because it's like, of course I'm accepting reality. Like, I'm not under an illusion that I'm not in this job or in this relationship or living in this house. But I think what people tend not to see, for very understandable reasons, is the degree to which we engage in sort of internal psychological ways of like flinching from where we are in the moment, and sort of avoiding the feeling of being in reality. I'm not sure I can say it much more clearly than that. And so, and even that's not like, it's not a federal crime. I think most of the time, an example is like social media, right? Although most of the time I think we go to social media because our thing we're doing is challenging, and we just rather like chill out on social media. I've had experiences of finding social media really soothing. If you're like very upset about something, like it is properly soothing to just sort of scroll past endless sort of random anything. And that's a sort of extreme version of something that I think we're sort of all doing all the time on some level, which is slightly flinching from the emotional experience of being where we are, because it feels nicer to not have to feel negative emotions, obviously. Yes. Oh, yes, no, absolutely. I think the place where Silicon Valley needs blaming is in the fact that the technology that we land on in those moments is then like designed to keep us there for the next 3 hours. But yes, no, absolutely, totally. It would you'd find something if in a world without digital distractions.
Yeah, and I think towards the end of the book you talk about sort of 10 points that we can use to sort of reframe this and approach productivity and time management in a better way. I'm not going to go through all 10, but I think it'd be good to talk about some of the ones that you think that most people could apply in order to have a better relationship with their own time.
Sure, I'll talk about any of them, but if you want me to bring one up just off the top of my head, it would be this idea about deciding in advance what to fail at. This notion of sort of thinking through the domains of your life and the different kind of ambitions that you have for the different domains, and making a sort of upfront decision that for the next month, 6 months, a year, there are specific ones that you're really going to decide from the beginning not to accomplish, not to achieve. Because we live in this, so we're in this situation of infinite possibilities and finite capacities. And the natural tendency is to try to sort of excel in them all, to be, depending on your life situation, I don't know, but like sort of totally give yourself over to your work projects or your creative projects, your academic projects, your relationships, some hobby you're really into, your physical fitness, and then meet this problem that, you can't do more than 100%. And then just feel bad about yourself for sort of half-assing all these different domains of your life when you run into this truth. But this idea, which I attribute in the book to an author called John Acuff, where I first found it in his writing, this idea that like if you say, well, actually, you know what, the next 6 months really are going to be dedicated to this new business I'm starting, or to doing as well as I possibly can in this degree or something like that. And sure, you've got to do basic things to stay basically fit, but maybe this is the time not to be training for the 10K. Maybe this is the time, and it goes different, there's life stages, right? There's certainly times in life when looking after a newborn baby and getting away with as little as you possibly can at work might be the way you would flip that. But it's just about sort of making that decision for a period of time so that you're not even attempting several of these things, and you can really give your all to the ones that you do give, with this self-trust that like the time is going to come when those other things will get their turn. Because I think a part of the anxiety that drives a lot of us is like, if I'm not doing all of these things right now, like it's almost like I might forget and wake up and be 85 and have completely forgotten that I also wanted to, learn to meditate or become a better cook, or and I just don't think that's going to happen for things that are really important to you, naturally speaking. I just don't think you're not going to forget that they exist. So it actually makes a lot more sense to sequentially focus on them to the extent possible. Of course, you can't literally do one thing in your life for a month and nothing else, but to the extent possible.
I think it's the fact that you think you're going to forget it. I think partly it's that. I think partly the reason is you see other people doing it and they've been somewhat successful at it, and you're like, well, I should be doing that as well. And
that's a good point.
I feel like is where it's really difficult. As a content creator, that's somewhere that I really struggle with, because you want to do a podcast. You want to have an Instagram channel like I do and you talk about books and grow that. And then you want to have a Twitter page and you want to have your personal YouTube channel.
Yep.
You also have other projects that I do, I have freelance work. I have athletic pursuits. It's like, where does that stop? Like, where's the end? And it's something that I struggle with the most. But I think that the aspect of FOMO is very, very important in deciding why we need to do it right now.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really excellent point. And I'm not a content creator in the same sense as you, so I probably don't know there's also things I probably ought to be doing that I'm not doing. But to the extent that I've sort of dipped my toe in this stuff, I feel like the advice you always get from sensible people is like, no, pick one social media channel and work on that for a while, and like maybe two, but pick one kind of writing and just do it regularly for the next X amount of time instead of. And I totally feel that the alternative urge, right, which is like, I'd love to do all 50 of these things, and it's not that you won't even get round to doing them all. It's that if you can be sequential about them and weather the anxiety, like withstand the anxiety that comes from not doing quite a few of them at any one time, you will actually get more of them up and running in the long run. Because if you're working on 20 different channels or projects or streams at once, whenever one of them starts to feel difficult, you'll just bounce off to the other one. So you'll actually make less progress because they will act as impediments to each other. And you just sort of end up doing this strange sort of transmutation of the emotion where you say like, wow, that guy's doing a really good podcast and I'm not doing a podcast at all. But that's just a reminder that the reason I'm not doing a podcast is because I'm doing this other thing and I'm giving it my all right now. So therefore, it's almost good that I see someone else doing a podcast and I'm not doing one. I don't know.
You need to have a change of perspective. I think you also need to have the appreciation of where you want to go in relationship to your personal circumstances. I think the difficulty is you see what other people are doing. And this isn't a matter of comparison so much as it is a thing of, that you should be doing something similar given you're in similar positions. Mm-hmm. But it's more having the awareness of, okay, what do you actually want to do with it in the future rather than perhaps what you think is beneficial now.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And, you look at someone like Cal Newport, whose work I know you'll be aware of, that he's not on social media at all because that suits his goals, and that then a different career works out on the basis of that decision. It doesn't mean that a career focused entirely on producing content for social media won't work out. It's just like these things will take shape based on the decisions that you make, and so it will be useful if the decisions were somewhat allied to what you think it would be good to accomplish, rather than the sheer notion that you have to be doing all the things that everyone else is doing, quite possibly for goals that you don't actually have.
Exactly. What's your approach to doing with that, like from a personal level? How do you go about planning and setting goals? Are you a goal setter, specifically goal setter, or do you approach it from the aspect of you have a general idea about the type of person that you want to become, and then it sort of maps out the things that you have to do? How do you work sort of backwards, or do you plan forwards?
It's a really interesting question. I feel like I'm very much in sort of transition at the moment because I did do quite a lot of that planning to make sure that this book finally got completed and launched. Now it's a fairly reactive stage of things where, it's hard to plan because it's hard to know who's going to be interested in the book and what opportunities are or are not going to arise from the book. So I think, I'm probably more of a bottom-up person. I have some success planning at the level of a week, trying to figure out in a very informal ad hoc way, not in a very strict sense, but like where I roughly want to be by the end of a week, and writing that out can be very useful for me. I sort of dream of being a planner at a higher altitude than that, but I can't claim that it's ever really taken root in my own life. I'd be interested to know your experiences. Like, I feel like 90-day plans are a wonderful thing and I'm in love with them, but whether I've ever made one work is a different question.
So I don't really plan so much as I think about the type of person that I want to become.
Right.
So what's worked for me is, in the past I used to set out, let's say, a week plan or a month plan and say, okay, after this period of time I want to get X done. I want to record 8 podcasts. I want to record, whatever it might be, right? Task, insert task.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've actually realized is, if you focus on the type of person that you want to become, or the things that you want to be associated with, the task will sort of map itself out automatically.
Yeah.
You don't have to think about the individual task if you think about the person or the type. I think in James Clear's book, he talks about the idea of identity level change. Right. And I think that's very interesting. It's okay, what's the type of person that you want to become, who that is, be very specific about who that person is, and it will just map itself out. You'll know what to do automatically, because what does a writer do? They write. Yep. What does a content creator do? They create content. It's easy once you know what you want to do. So I think that's been my approach.
Really
I think like with this podcast, I knew before I created content online that I wanted to speak with authors. That's something I've always wanted to do. But I used that other content creation aspect as a platform for this. Like, if I just started and no one knew who I was, or I didn't have a following, it'd be very rare for me to be able to reach out to authors and get them on. Mm-hmm. So having that idea of the type of thing I want to do and sort of work backwards made more sense. So that's kind of been my approach.
No, I think that's really interesting. I guess the only other thing I'd add to that in terms of my own practice is, like, once you're on the little task-based level, various different ways of limiting your work in progress, so that you're sort of feeding your tasks through a bottleneck. You're only focusing on 2 or 3 things at a time. I use a Kanban type thing on the in software, but I write in the book about various ways of handling your to-do list, so that you feed tasks from a sort of infinitely long to-do list into a very narrow, like a sort of 3 or 4 item to-do list. I don't know if that probably needs more explanation than I'm giving it, but the basic point is, at any point, try to be working on only a handful of things, and not to let more things into that doing zone until you've moved one of them out by completing it. So instead of saying, like, oh, today I've just got 100 things on my plate, try either at the level of projects or at the level of individual tasks to be like, I'm going to do these 5 things before I go back to the list of the menu of 1,000 things and pick another bunch of things to do. So that you just really do shepherd individual tasks through to their end point, or as far as you can get them, depending on other people's contributions, before you move on to another one, instead of just constantly dissipating your attention among them. And I think that in itself is a discipline for sort of goal setting in a way, because you're making a slightly more important choice when you pick an item to bring it into your column of, or list of 5 tasks that you're working on at the moment. If you could put 100 in, you could just take 100. But if you're going to only choose 5, you really have to think a bit more seriously in that moment. Like, is this going to be is this actually the best use of my time to take this one back, to take this one on now? And that sort of keeps things a little bit more allied with your goals and values, I think.
Is that in practice, is that literally then just writing down everything that you need to do, get it all down, and then from there you can then prioritize based on the things that you need to do immediately, and sort of then forget about everything else? Because the way I like to see to-do list is like priorities. It's like, is this as a priority for today, this week, next month? Because sometimes there's no point doing something that you need to get done in a month this week, because there might be something you need to do this week. So I feel like a priorities is probably the better way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it amounts to the same thing. I'm just talking in a very simple way. I'm sure you have some familiarity with the whole Kanban idea, but just imagining, in the most simple sense, 3 columns on a whiteboard or on a computer replicating the whiteboard: to do, doing, done, tasks or projects written on post-its or on cards that move across this flow, right? That's just one of a million ways of doing this. But if you say that middle column that says doing right now or today or at the moment can only have a limited fixed number of items in it, then you've got this huge reservoir of things you ought to be doing, and then you've got this kind of focal column of 4 or 5 of them that you're going to work on and make progress on before you're going to allow any new ones into that column. I find that it is about prioritization, but it's a sort of almost an organic, natural kind of prioritization, because you're not going to pick something for that very VIP status of that you're working on it right now if it's not the most sensible thing to be working on right now, because you sort of feel the pressure of only being able to choose 5 of them. I don't feel that in this conversation I sort of came in backwards to the idea of limiting your work in progress. It's in the book and also everywhere online, but limiting your work in progress is the search phrase here. Yeah.
So the two overarching tips then, and there's 10 in the books. If you want to read all 10, then obviously go get the book. But was limiting your work in progress, and remind me of the first one.
Deciding in advance
Yes.
which areas of life to fail at.
I actually think obviously the work in progress one is really interesting, but I think the first one's really interesting because failure has this negative connotation to it. So none of us want to fail at anything, but in order to be very good, or to at least get the things that we want to get done at, there is an infinite number of possibilities and outcomes and things that we want that we have to basically say no to, which I think is very, very important. Have that mindset. So the end of our conversation. So thank you so much for taking the time to discuss your book, 4,000 Weeks, Time and How to Use It. Where's the best place for people to find you, Oliver? Website, social media?
Well, the book is everywhere you'd expect to buy a book, and my website is oliverburkeman.com, and I am Oliver Burkeman on Twitter. That's Burkeman.
Perfect. I'll put all that in the description below so people can go and check it out. Thank you, Oliver.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.